Welcome, everyone, to the P.A.S. Report podcast. This is your host, Nick Giordano. Glad you could join me. Make sure you are following and subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss an episode. Also, share this episode with your family and friends and on social media. I have a great guest for today. I have Professor Stanley Ridgley, author of Brutal Minds, someone that understands college campuses. He understands the mindset of these feckless administrators and a entitled student body that we're witnessing throughout the country. Stan, always good to see you. Glad you come on. How are you today?
I'm doing fantastic, Nick. It's always good to see you, and especially on today, May Day, a big time college, I should say big time communist holiday that I don't usually celebrate, but I'm going to celebrate today given the events over the past 24 hours on America's campuses.
That's right. Here in New York, we've had the
Yep.
NYPD going into Columbia University. Now, I want to
Yep.
talk to you even before we get to the clearing out of some of these campuses.
Yep.
The idea that it didn't even have to get to this point,
No.
right? I mean, when we look at the way these college administrators handled this, I mean, you talk about a failure of leadership. What are your thoughts that they allowed students to basically commandeer the college campuses?
Well, I like to contrast what happened at Columbia and UCLA with what happened at the University of Florida under President Ben Sasse. Ben Sasse, dynamic president that he is and true leader, basically told the protesters and the folks in this hate camp that had been set up, you've got to do this, this, and this to adhere and to obey and follow the university guidelines. And if you don't, you'll suffer consequences. They did not do this at Columbia, and the administration seemed to have no cognizance of what its role was supposed to be. The idea of leadership seems to be absent in these people's minds at Columbia and also at UCLA. And they, as you said, quite correctly, it didn't have to get to this point. On Monday, Columbia set a 2 p.m. deadline and said that you'll be suspended, perhaps expelled, if you don't clear your encampment by 2 p.m. And of course, 35 feckless faculty members joined the encampment, and 2 p.m. came and went, and there were no consequences. This was the open door that the demonstrators, the agitators, needed, the signal that Columbia was going to do nothing. Had Columbia acted on Monday at 2 p.m., we never would have seen the events of the last 24 hours with police called in to storm an occupied building on the campus. And we never would have seen the events at UCLA where these counter protesters came onto the campus and decided to do what the administration of UCLA should have done. And police were called in at UCLA as well to clear the campus, which had erupted in violence. Completely unnecessary.
Absolutely. And one of the things that it aggravates me is when I hear people referring to these as protests, right? So I am someone that will always defend actual protest. I defend the
Right.
idea of freedom of speech. You could be chanting death to America. I may not support you. I don't agree with that messaging, but I'll support your right to say it. However, these to me were not protests because they impeded people's ability of movement, the freedom of movement. They impeded students from attending in-person classes. They were assaulting, harassing, and threatening other students. And when we look at it, and this is even before the buildings got stormed. Yeah. So when we look at it, why are they still categorized as protests when clearly they're not? Once you cross a certain threshold, the protest is over and it's an extremist movement.
Yes, it is. And I think that control of the language is important, the control of the rhetoric. And we can find a lot of this nastiness and noxiousness, it gets glossed over by calling it protests, demonstrate mostly peaceful protests. And the fact is, these are hate movements. I call these hate camps that kind of sprang up on the college campuses that were motivated by extremist hate for Israel. You know, I think that anti-Semitism has 1,000 names and 1,000 proxies, whether it be anti-Zionist, anti-Israeli. When it's really anti-Semitic, we all know what it is. And we saw this but quite clearly at UCLA, where there was the blockades of students of a certain ethnic extraction were enacted, and we saw this chronicled by videos by a very outstanding young man by the name of Eli Tzivis, who filmed himself being blocked from attending class by these protesters, actually these extremist haters, who were breaking the law, trespassing, blockading the campus, harassing, assaulting students. These are basically borderline riots that were kind of subdued under this proxy name of protesters.
Now, everyone needs to check out Brutal Minds. They need to read it. It is a phenomenal book. And what is one of the more interesting and bizarre things, but then again, it's academia. So to me, it's so fitting. You have students that want to protest, but provide a pro-American point of view. You have students that hand out pocket constitutions, and then they're relegated to like some obscure part of a college campus in a free speech zone. That's what they call them, because you may trigger other people. Yet these students were able to hijack an entire campus and basically hold it hostage. And you had all these universities, and I will say that it's the top university, the quote unquote elite universities, right? We're not seeing this go on in community colleges because people have lives at community colleges. They got real jobs. They got kids they got to take care of. We're not seeing it at a lot of Southern colleges. We're not seeing much of this. And if it does happen, it's quickly squashed. It's all the elite universities in these Democrat cities that basically they negotiate with the protesters, right? That's what I heard. Negotiate. Let's negotiate with these people. Do you think who won in this? I mean, I know the NYPD cleared out the camps here. North Carolina, we see Chapel Hill getting cleared out. Texas, we saw get cleared out. University, Madison, Wisconsin, I believe, got cleared out as well. So we are seeing movement now at this point. But who really won? Because basically you have the administrators that just bowed to the mob. And I want to make it clear that these people are not reflective of the larger student body. Most students didn't engage in these types of protests, but these are the loudest voices, but they're also the most dangerous within our society as well.
Well, I think it's clear that the victory we won. When I say we, I'm referring to those who respect the Enlightenment University, the idea of the university as a restricted area where we can have this free exchange of ideas, that both you and I agree that that is what the university should be. And that we had these medievalists, these authoritarians came onto the campus, outsiders, joined with sympathetic students and set up these no-go zones for certain students and faculty and staff, and basically took over the university. And I think that what we saw in the last 24 hours is a restoration of the university, as a place or a repository, a safe space, if you will, for those of us who believe is a place where ideas can be exchanged freely. It's our victory, but I don't want it to be an ephemeral victory, because the people who launched this whole project to begin with are still in place, both on the college campuses and the ones who allowed it to take place, as you so pointed out, people like Columbia, the ones who allowed them and waited till the last possible minute to call in the authorities to handle something that they themselves should have handled. They're still in place. And there's nothing, I don't see any kind of recognition that they were culpable in all of this. I will tell you this, there was a cadre of people on virtually every college campus, certainly the ones that were occupied by these folks, that enables this to happen. They advocate, they being these people in the bureaucracy, advocate for student activism. This is in their literature. I detail this in Brutal Minds. We know who these people are. We know that they do not view themselves as neutral participants in these social justice causes. They claim, well, no, we're not neutral. We need to take sides. And I can guarantee you, as you know, it's not this, they're not taking the side of, say, the Second Amendment and having a demonstration on that, or pro US Western values. No, it's always a leftist cause. And they are the ones who are enabling this to happen. And they're still in place. And so that's why I'm celebrating today. But I know that the hard work ahead is going to be to root out these folks, dismiss them from the campus. I don't think that they're salvageable in terms of their values. They're committed. And I think that the good guys need to be just as committed to ensure that this doesn't happen again.
You know, unfortunately, we have, like I said, these were the elite institutions, and they've done enormous institutional damage to their own reputations, let's be honest, but not just the reputation of the institution, to higher education as a whole.
Right.
Right now, we're witnessing the majority of Americans now have lost faith in our college institutions. And that poll was before all this mayhem broke out on October 7th. And since then, this poll was last year, where
Yeah.
we see people have lost faith in our higher education, from parents to students to employers. At this point, do you think that it's possible to reverse that? Or do you think that all the self-inflicted wounds that academia has harmed itself with, do you think that it's too late? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's we saw a reversal at University of Pennsylvania whenever they fired the Liz McGill, the president of the UPenn, and replaced her, and we saw a lot of alumni and a lot of donor activism. It put pressure on the university and speaking the language that they
Yes,
understand.
money does talk. Money is an
Yes,
important
donor
factor.
dollars. And so I think that this is I think that boards of trustees who have usually just rubber stamped the wishes, the radical wishes of various presidents who have come and gone, who merely preside rather than actually lead in the universities. We see this horrific example of President Shafik at Columbia, her complete lack of leadership, she was always behind 2 or 3 steps behind what was actually happening at Columbia. And I think that once Shafik is replaced, and I think that once the board of trustees awakens, I like to call them sleepy boards of trustees, and stop rubber stamping what is the bureaucracy on our college campuses led by our hapless presidents. If they stop rubber stamping that, listen to the parents, listen to the donors, listen to the alumni, they can indeed reverse course. And I think it's important that they make a statement that that is exactly what they're doing. If we have a statement of culpability and acceptance of responsibility and accountability from university leadership, rather than pushing it off to one side and not acknowledging that they did anything wrong, if we have this acknowledgement, I think people are forgiving and say, okay, finally, the colleges and universities are, at least these are on the right track. I think that Ben Sass at Florida has sets a wonderful example of how a college president ought to address these types of issues. Florida's statement on the issues of the protesters at Florida is worth looking at.
Yeah, you're not children. You're adults, and we're going to treat you like
Exactly.
adults. It really
We're not a
said.
daycare. We're not a daycare center here.
It's so true. And then I look at some of the feckless administrators, and I keep on pointing to Columbia. You put out a hysterical post, I think it was on LinkedIn the other day, where one of the custodians at one of the buildings that were taken
Yes.
over at Columbia grabbed one of the protesters and pushed him against the wall. He should be the college president. And I agree
Yes.
with that. They probably have more common sense than most of those that have been steeped in academia. But do you think that higher education is going to have that moment of self? I mean, they're going to need it sooner or later because the reckoning is here in higher education. But do you think they have it within them to self-reflect and say, well, yeah, we're part of the problem. We've allowed this anti-Americanism to fester on college campuses. We've allowed, the professors to push activism over actual learning and debate and dialogue, that, we failed as an institution. And so we are going to reform. We are going to change. Do you think they have it within them to actually self-reflect at that level?
I think that there's a lot of people on the college campuses. There's a lot of colleges and universities out there, and we're focusing on a minority that are, as you stated, perceive themselves as being elite, and they are damaging themselves, shooting themselves in the foot. I think that there are good people. For instance, I would say, look at Columbia. There were 35 radical professors, rebellious, going out on the front lines and wearing their orange vests, but there were only 35, and Columbia's faculty is tremendously, is a lot of faculty out there did not join these protesters. I think that there are a lot of good faculty that simply don't speak out because it's not there's not a personal incentive system for them to speak out.
But isn't that silence, especially from
Yeah.
tenured professors, isn't that silence part of the problem? I mean, I'm constantly hearing from other professors that will email me and say, thank you for speaking out. We agree with you. And I always respond like, you have a voice too. If all of us stood up, maybe we'd actually show that there is hope in academia, that there is some normalcy and sane voices in academia that believe in actual education, not indoctrination. So do you think that silence is part of a problem?
I think it is. The left likes to say the phrase "silence is complicity." I think in this time, in this point, it actually has veracity to it. That silence is complicity. That if you don't like what you see is going on, you just kind of wring your hands or tisk tisk and shake your head instead of speaking out and simply just making a nice gesture, a nice. You don't have to go out on the barricades or anything like that. But I think you're right. If everyone who saw this abominable anti-Semitic expression of these hate camps on the campuses stood up, we find that we're in the majority. I think a recent poll shows that 80% of Americans thought this was absolutely despicable and support Israel in how they're prosecuting the war half a world away. And so but I tell you what, Nick, that one of the problems with this is the left is activist by its very nature. They are activists. They want to achieve a victory. They want to reform the academy, transform the academy. Whereas folks that are like myself, like you, we simply want to live and let live. We don't want to rid the academy of these people. Not by any stretch. I don't want to rid the academy of folks that I disagree with. I have no desire to do that. But I can assure you, there are a lot of folks on the other side who want to rid the academy of folks like me and folks like you. And so this is one of the built-in problems that we have is that when we achieve a victory like this, it's transient because we have no desire to exact retribution against the folks who were on the other side, at least philosophically. We certainly want to prosecute and punish the folks who were guilty of crimes of trespassing and assault and harassment, and punish them, of course. But I don't think there's any kind of intellectual, philosophical notion that we have to purge the university of this sort of thing. But we do have to stand up and say, listen, enough is enough. And that the universities has certain values that we derived from the Enlightenment over the past 300 years that come out of the Enlightenment, come out of the scientific revolution. And these people that I'm talking about in student affairs and in radical administrators, they want to change that part of the university that we hold not sacred, but that we hold very, very dear to our patrimony.
Well, you just brought up a really good point because when I look at it, it used to be that faculty did their job, administrators did their job, and that was that. They
Right.
stayed out of each other's business pretty much,
Yeah.
and everyone was happy with the status quo. But now you have these enormous diversity, equity, inclusion departments that exist on college campuses, and they're pushing and bullying their
Right.
way into the classrooms, determining what professors can teach, what they need to stay
Right.
away from. You're seeing, I believe it's 67% of colleges. I might be slightly off by a percentage or two, but about 67% of
Right.
colleges now require diversity electives, at least 2 diversity, equity, inclusion courses, or that are certified as DEI courses. And so while a lot of professors don't like it, they are silent. And like I said, if you don't have tenure, I understand it. I get it, because then they could easily just push you out. But if you have tenure, you should be speaking bad about this because it is changing the dynamics of the classroom. You have people that never taught in a classroom, don't know the subject material coming
Right.
in and saying, well, no, now you need to teach this way. And isn't the diversity, equity, inclusion monster a big part of the problem here?
I definitely think there's a definite link between what we've seen on the college campuses with respect to these demonstrations, the mantras that they chant, the idea of decolonization, that is right out of the DEI philosophy and ideology.
And if you ask
And,
these students, they have no idea what that means. They'll spout it, but if you actually pin them down and ask them questions, they have no idea what any of this means.
right. These are the foot soldiers. Young people are easily manipulated and into doing this type of thing because it's fun. You don't have to go to class. You can just chant what other people tell you to chant, and you make flags. It's a very arts and crafty kind of thing where you're making slogans and dancing. It's almost like a festival, and that I think that's a big attraction for it. And they don't even think that they're and consider the fact that maybe they're being manipulated and providing a media spectacle for forces that are darker than what they might imagine. But yeah, DEI officers are definitely culpable in this because of the ideology that guides the average DEI office. I will say I agree with you 100% that they're staffed with bureaucrats who never taught in the classroom. They're providing this diversity training based on this narrow ideology of oppressors and oppressed, exploiters and exploited, good and evil. And this is not something that is mainstream by any stretch. It is a fringe ideology that has somehow wormed its way into the college bureaucracy, and intends to stay, and it intends to infiltrate every corner of the university, including diversity statements, which are loyalty oaths. And these non-academics, I would say, very poorly educated people, educated very narrowly, intend to try to lecture faculty on what they need to do with respect to hiring, with respect to their own loyalty oaths, and with respect to how they teach in the classroom. This is in writing. I've seen it many places. And if we don't stand up to it and point it out for the fallacy and the fallacious foundations that it is, the folks that you mentioned that aren't standing up are going to find themselves under duress and no one there to help them.
Yeah, and it's going to go either that way, or just the institutions will destroy themselves so much and they'll be closing up shop, and so the professor will be unemployed anyway. And I want to remind people, diversity, equity, inclusion is not an academic discipline. Never was, never has been, never will be. It is an ideology. It's a political agenda. But what concerns me is that what started out at the college institutions has now spread out to the entirety of our society. I mean, we're seeing it all over the place. Businesses are now moving away from it. After the whole debacle of 2020, they're like, all right, we've had enough of this DEI stuff. But we see it in the K through 12 system, where you see students aren't really being educated. They're not learning about the United States, our systems of governance, why our founders decided to pick a system of federalism and have a republic. And it's allowing these students to be susceptible to the messages that we see beamed into, political culture. We see it on social media and pop culture, the media itself, that America's just institutionally evil, racist place that's built on slavery and repression. And many of these students believe it. How do we overcome that?
Well, I think it's education. I hate to use the word, but what we can do is demand that a recognition is this is just the latest play, the latest edition of radical left on the college campuses. That the communism failed, socialism has not been doing so well. So now we have critical racialism, which is really Marxism warmed over, neo-Marxism, critical theory, which is neo-Marxist at its core. And it really goes back to the schools of education, which are the bottom feeders of most universities. And these folks are feeding these radical student or teachers back into K through 12. They're not really educated. They're not trained in subject matter they're supposed to be teaching, math or science. They're basically taught education theory. And this is why their focus is on social emotional learning and trying to transform young people and educate them out of the belief system that they have learned at home. And you look at the education schools are also feeding these bureaucrats onto the college campuses, and they're filling positions in the bureaucracy, in student affairs, enrollment managers, academic advisors, dorm managers, res life administrators, and they're teaching in what's called a paracurriculum or a co-curriculum. This is where the workshops thrive. This is where they try to teach and undermine students in the brainwash that I talk about in Brutal Minds. This is where it's actually done, and I show how it's done. I talk about the people who are doing it. It's not controversial in the least. This is what they say they're doing, and I think that once we begin to identify the mechanisms by which they're doing this and identify the offices and the people and how they're educated, I think that we can begin to roll this stuff back by, when I say education, I don't mean that idly. I'm talking about educating students in what your constitutional rights are and how these people on the campuses who are trying to brainwash you or indoctrinate you or utilize a thought reform program, what your rights are and how you can question them and fight back and basically roll them back and actually win on the campuses. I think it's absolutely essential for parents to understand what's happening on the campus rather than a kind of indictment that we always hear. Oh, it's colleges have always been this way. It's always been this way, the left and the right there. Well, no, colleges have not always been this way. Faculty used to occupy those administrative offices that advise students. Now these are professional administrators who are steeped in this crypto-Maoist ideology of Paulo Freire and Karl Marx. I don't want to go down the road too far, but I will say a lot of what we see now is warmed over Herbert Marcuse from 1968 and his long march through the institutions. We see the left has found a way to instrumentalize this long march and begin to actually take over the institutions that we think, we being the royal we think are unchanged from the way they were decades ago when we were in college, when of course they have changed and changed radically and for the worse.
Yeah, and the Marxists themselves have changed, because I had Marxist professors when I went to college, but they were awesome. They loved the idea of education. They
Right.
were confident in their knowledge of the subject material, and they loved the back and forth. They loved the debate. They encouraged the debate. The Marxists of
Right.
today, they want to shut you down. And I think you said something so critical that nobody talks about. It's because many of them haven't been educated in the subject material from kindergarten to college education.
Right.
Many of them aren't experts in the subject material, and then they replace what they should know subject material wise with ideology. And
Yeah.
I do see that as such a danger to the institution of academia, but also to our society as a whole. Now, when we look at the way faculty are trained and the academic ecosystem that exists, do you think that, are you seeing more and more people that believe in education, that believe in the concept of liberty, that we can have intellectual discourse? We may not agree, but we'll have intellectual discourse. Do you think that we're going to see more people that believe in that stuff gravitate towards academics, or because of what they're witnessing, they're going to stay away from academics and go into other fields?
Well, this has been the lament, I should say, the answer that the left has always provided, that that academia is can't the left because the smart conservatives go into business, and so people who are attracted to ideas, these are the leftists, and therefore this somehow substantiates their point of view on the college campuses. Will we see a kind of a brain drain away from the college campus? I think that we are at a strategic inflection point. I shared this with you earlier, the idea that if we view this what's happened in the last 24 hours on the college campuses and the clearing of these encampments, these hate camps, if we view this as an opportunity, not a victory, but an opportunity, I think that the information, I'm not going to make a pitch for my book or anything like that, because there's lots of great
Brutal
books out.
minds.
Yeah, Brutal Minds. There are lots of great books out there, that really treat this kind of thing. Closing of the American Mind by Alan Bloom back in 1987 is another example. All the books of Thomas Sowell are fantastic works. But what I talk about in Brutal Minds is what's happening on the campuses, naming names, programs, and how students and parents can arm themselves to make a change. We could talk about long-term change and talk about legislators like in Texas and Iowa and in Florida, and the good work that they can do. But what I'm interested in is showing parents and students how they can arm themselves to defend themselves against these poseurs who are on the college campus and get a really fine education that they've paid for. There's a lot of great things on college campuses right now, a lot of great faculty, a lot of opportunities. What we tend to see on television are the malcontents and the folks who are dissatisfied with the status quo and simply want to replace it with their own status quo. But they never really talk about that. This bald fist against the status quo is really a bid to replace it with something else. And I think that if we can ignore them and we can get students to focus on what they should be focusing on, we can see a renaissance in American higher education that has only been a kind of a dream of many folks over the last couple of years. But I think that the opportunity is really here now.
And a renaissance is certainly needed.
Yeah.
I won't disagree with that. I think a lot of people's eyes have been opened to the failures within the education system.
Yeah.
And a lot of it really started because of the coronavirus. So if there's one silver lining of coronavirus, that's it.
Yeah.
Stead, I really appreciate you coming on to talk to the audience. We're going to have links up to Brutal Minds on the P.A.S. Report website. So everyone check out PASreport.com. Stan, thanks for coming on, and hope to speak to you soon.
It's always my pleasure. Take care, Nick.